Wow, thank you. So I'm lucky to be here today. I'm lucky to be able to tell you a story that I really hope will help others. I'm lucky to be alive. Depression is still something we'd much rather not talk about. It's surrounded by stigma and stereotypes and good old-fashioned awkwardness when it comes to talking about our mental health. But for me, I'd say depression's transformed my life. It's made me who I am, and I think I've discovered a way where depression can be used to change my life and the lives of others for the better. So for me, I've struggled with depression and despair for most of my life. I spent much of my teenage years and 20s in psychiatric hospitals. Very few people knew I was in hospital. I took myself off from university and didn't tell my friends. Even those who did know, didn't really know. They didn't know I spent 2 years of my life with a nurse by my side every second of the day to stop me from harming myself. They didn't really know how many times I tried to kill myself or how hard I tried. I was too ashamed of telling my story. I was too ashamed of people knowing what was really going on for me. I wore a mask. People would come and visit me in hospital, and I'd keep the conversation focused on them and not me. It was as if we were just meeting up for a coffee. The mask I wore carried on when I was in hospital. I'd act and pretend like I was a nurse rather than a patient, in the way I went around smiling and trying to care for everyone else. What was going on for me was a terrible sense of shame, a sense that I wasn't good enough, that I was the worst person in the whole wide world. I really believed I was terrible and that I deserved to die. What changed for me was this sense of shame. So 2 things happened. First, a friend who I'd met in a community hospital, I was there for a couple of years, and she told me some of the things she talked about with her therapist. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe she was honest about some of the things she thought. I thought exactly the same things, but I'd never actually said them out loud. So I'm really grateful to her for what she did for me, because she opened a door and made me think, just maybe it's possible to talk and be honest. The other thing that happened was an encounter with my GP. I'd got to know him pretty well over the years, and I was getting ill again, about to enter hospital. And he said to me, "We can do this, Debs. We can get you into hospital. We can start the treatment, the therapy. We can do all of that. Or you can just decide you're okay." Decide I'm okay? How dare he say that to me? How dare he say I can just decide I'm okay? It really wasn't like that. Surely he didn't understand. But it played on my mind. I trusted him, and I thought about it. And it stayed with me for a long time. And one day, I decided that I was okay. I was the same as everyone else. I didn't need to be ashamed of my story. I didn't need to be ashamed of who I was, what I looked like, my personality, my background, the things I thought, my mental health problems. I was okay. I had good and bad bits, but basically, I was the same as every other human being on the planet. For me, that was a massive revelation. After a number of years of practicing telling my story, I have learnt there is a way to do it that invites interest and connection, as opposed to awkward moments and embarrassment. One example is that of my now husband. I'd been getting to know him on a surface kind of level when I knew it was time to tell him my story. I was absolutely terrified. I was so scared he'd reject me. But one day, I summoned up the courage, I took a deep breath, and I just blurted it out, probably really quickly. He was probably a bit overwhelmed. But his response, he was amazing. His response was, "It's not ideal, but it doesn't change anything." I couldn't believe it. It's not ideal. It doesn't change anything. Is that all my story was worth? But he was so right. We moved on, we got married, and we do life together now. After practicing telling my story to other people, I know that there's a way to do it that makes people interested and realise that you're unique and different, but not different in a special kind of way, in that you're unique and able to have learned and developed through your experiences. So I know that to get through what I have, I must be resourceful, else I wouldn't have asked for help from other people. I must have some inner strength in order to get through life, both inside and outside of hospital. And I must have a strong desire to live, else I'll be dead by now. So what I do now is invite people to celebrate my story, to celebrate how awesome I am. Not in an arrogant kind of way, honestly, but in a way that says I'm the same as every other human being on the planet. We're all awesome, and we all have a story of overcoming or moving forward, no matter how small or large. In June 2015, I decided to take this idea further. I sent a 20-page copy of my story to 150 people I knew. Sent it through the post. They were all people who I felt I had a connection with, that I felt I connected with in some way. Either they were work colleagues, friends, family, even some people I knew off the telly. So I sent it out in the post on a Friday night. I was so scared. So I waited, and I was telling myself, this is just an experiment, let's see what happens. And the result of the experiment was so positive. Most people who got a story got back to me, and none of those responses were negative. In fact, many people went on to share their own story with me, and many people said they were inspired by that bit of post they got that day. Since then, I've gone on to develop Touch Network. Touch Network is all about telling stories and touching lives. So I invite people to come and share their stories, whatever that might be. It can be on any subject. We run events, workshops, publish books, and do creative projects. Mostly this year, we've done events. So we invite people to come along to a cafe or a bar or a restaurant. We have nibbles and coffee and sometimes fairy lights. It's all lovely. And people share their stories of overcoming. So I coach the speakers beforehand. I have 4 speakers lined up, and they know what they're going to say. And they stand up and they tell their story of overcoming, especially the bits that make them awesome. So we work together to celebrate these stories, and some of these stories have been about some really gritty subjects. So we've had people talk about adoption, ethnicity, family background, childhood struggles, grief, all sorts of things. But the results have been that speakers feel empowered, guests are inspired, and stereotypes and stigma begin to be broken down. So I've learned how important it is to share your story, and I help people to share their stories in the most positive way possible. So we work together to celebrate the awesomeness of how our stories make us who we are. Thank you so much for listening.